You may be dissatisfied with your job or where your career is taking you. We are in the middle of this great resignation, so you are in good company. A lot of people are thinking the same thing. And some of you people may be thinking, you know what, rather than working for somebody else, I might rather be working for myself. So that kind of thing is also something that we believe gives you more long-term security. We call it diversification of income. Some people would call it a side hustle, passive income. It could be, you could call it a few different things, but there is a lot to it. There's a lot to getting something started on your own, and most of them actually don't succeed. And so that's why we have today on the show, Matt Foley. Matt is a serial entrepreneur. He owns 3 startups after successfully starting and selling another one. And he's deeply involved in the entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Rochester. In addition to his company, he runs a startup incubator for Next Core here in Rochester, and he's responsible for advising 100 other startup companies. And so he'll share with us some of the principles that you need to know if you want to get something going for yourself. So Matt Foley, welcome to 30 Minute Money. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be here.
So let's start with the basic stuff. So if somebody wants to do something on their own, what does it take to be an entrepreneur?
Wow. Well, I think it takes obviously a little bit of risk taking, though not as much, I think, as people think. There's the classic stereotype of an entrepreneur is a huge risk taker, and I think these days with the way that loyalty works, working for bigger companies, it works both ways, and sometimes it can be more of a risk to be at a single company rather than having a diversification of income sources and clients and customers and people paying you. So I think it takes a little bit of risk. What else? It takes some foresight, some ability to kind of look into the future and say, hey, here's where I think things are going to go. I'm not quite sure. And I'd say an ability to deal with uncertainty. There's ups and downs with entrepreneurship. And so it's kind of having the mental fortitude to being able to say, it's not going to be all great days, and it's not going to be all, rainy days like we're having here in Rochester today.
Yeah, so, right, exactly.
It's going to be ups and downs, and how do I mitigate that? So yeah, those are some of the attributes I think I see of, and then there's just perseverance, grit, okay, and the ability to just stick it through, because it's a long journey. It's a marathon and a sprint. So
okay. Well, that's good. So that's a little bit about the person that should do it. How do you recognize an idea that's worth pursuing? How do you, if you get an idea, how do you figure out if it's something that you should try out or if it's not worth all the effort?
Yeah, well, if you get an idea, however it comes, number one, don't quit your day job yet. Get out there and find out ways to cheaply and quickly validate if there's going to be something there. And the best way to do that is to, and without going into too much detail in the process here, but identify who you think the target customer is. And generally speaking, it's going to be best if you start with a group of people that you're already part of that market, right? You have a ton of industry experience in a certain domain. Maybe start there, because it's going to be infinitely easier than trying to target some group of people that you're not part of that audience. And then define what you think that their problems are and what potential solutions look like, and then just go out and talk to people and try to have a conversation with them about, like, here's kind of what I'm thinking of, and what do you think, and getting a kind of read on what they think of the idea. Now, you got to be careful, because you want to get outside of your friends and family in doing that process, right? You need to talk to people and get an unbiased point of view, but that's generally where I would start. But I would not quit the day job. I'd be testing things on the side and having these conversations, while you're employed.
Yeah. So let's pursue that, because I think that's a really important point. What would a process like that look like? So some people might say, I want to chuck it because this is such an incredibly good idea. I want to just run after it full speed. But what would a progression like you're envisioning look like?
I kind of like what I said, like, define that target customer. Who are they, right? Mm-hmm. What are their attributes? Go out and talk to them. And I'd actually start, before you even start with sort of pitching your idea and see what they think about it, I would start with just trying to understand them and what their problems are. Just go out and have a conversation. Like, let's say my target audience I'm going to use financial advisors. I'd go out and have a conversation with at least 10 financial advisors to say, hey, tell me about what a day in the life is like for you. What are the biggest problems that you encounter on a day-to-day basis? And what, if anything, are you doing to solve those problems, right? Like, and what's your biggest problem and what are kind of secondary problems? And what you want to be looking for is them actively taking steps to solve those problems. Because sometimes people will tell you they have a problem, but if they're not trying to do anything to solve it, generally speaking, it's not a very painful problem, and you want to be solving a painful problem.
Yeah, so you're taking it sort of from the perspective of somebody who just wants to be in business and looking for the, for some kind of business to be in. But when I hear people talking about it, it's what I hear more often is that somebody's got an idea already. Somebody's got this, somebody's going to have the next Amazon, right? And so two questions I have for you. One of them is, I agree with you. You and I are both quantitative feedback type folks, right? So I'm qualitative feedback folks. So, we're oriented to going out and testing the market, going out and looking for what the needs are. But if you've already got an idea for something you want to do or something that you want to sell, how is that different? How do you test that idea? And then the follow-up question will be, how do you distinguish between the things that people say that they would buy and the things that they will actually buy? So let's take that first one. How do you test out an idea if you've already got the idea?
If you've already got the idea and you want to just quickly see if there's something there, what I would do is use a service to set up then there's free or low cost ways to do this, to set up just a simple landing page that describes the idea. Give it a name, put a graphic up there or whatever. A service that I use and like for this is called UMSO, UMSO.com, but there's so many out there, strikingly, and there's a bunch of landing page creators. And I would just put up a page that describes what the idea, who you think the idea is for. And then, you can start with a simple form of what you're looking for is a form of commitment to validate that there's something there, right? The simplest one is just give me your email address, and if you're interested, I'll notify you when we launch, if we launch. That's pretty low commitment. Some people take it a step further and say, try to get people to do a demo or to do a call with them, because that means that the person's interested enough in your idea that they'll actually hop on a Zoom or a phone call to talk to you about it. So that's a second level of commitment. And I think a third level of commitment that some people do, it's not very common in more B2B settings, but it's common in consumer settings, is they'll go and they'll ask for some sort of financial commitment, some sort of like put down a down payment. And if enough people are into this, kind of Kickstarter almost, if enough people are into this, we're going to build it. If they aren't, we refund your money, no loss there. So that's the ultimate form of commitment, that you're onto something. If people put their credit card down for something before you even launch. So.
And that's what I've heard in sort of the internet marketing stuff, is that the moment you can cross over that line, even if it's for $1 or $10, the moment you get somebody exchanging money for something, the whole world changes. So
completely.
That's really interesting.
And the risk is that when you go out and talk to people about your idea, especially as an entrepreneur, right? You're giving off this vibe, you're excited about it, right? And so when you talk to people and you're saying, hey, here's the concept, what do you think? They're going to pick up on that excitement, right? They'll mirror your excitement. And so entrepreneurs, all the time, I see this at the incubator, they come in and they say, oh, I talked to all these people and they love it, right? And people telling you, especially as the entrepreneur doing this research yourself, they'll tell you they love it. And then it's a totally different thing when you ask for the credit card and you launch, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's crickets or,
Yeah. So, and I'll go back to, like I said, you and I both do some qualitative research stuff. And one thing I'm sure you've observed, I've observed it with the people I do it for, is that, they talk to the prospective clients and they ask about something, and they tell you what they hear, and then you go ask very similar or even the same people and you hear an entirely different story. Because if you're excited about the idea, you're going to hear that validation, right? You're going to hear, you're going to imagine that people are really excited about it.
Yep. There's times I've sat on those conversations with entrepreneurs, right? Just to be a fly on the wall, just to listen. Are they asking good questions and things like that? and we'll come out of it and we'll kind of take a step back, and it was like, what did you hear? What did I hear? And it's like, were we in the same,
Right, exactly.
Zoom room? I think I was in a different Zoom. Like maybe we logged into the wrong place, because we're not hearing anything the same. There's confirmation bias, and they're
Exactly.
coloring their whole perspective on things by, so it's the reason why qualitative researchers exist is because we don't have a horse in the game. So, we can give you an unbiased assessment of things. So
yeah. So you can put up a web page and just put the idea out there and see who responds to it. You can ask for an email address. You can ask for, you can ask for a demo. You can ask, or you can ask for somebody to put a down payment on something, which would be the highest. Let's go back to the demo thing again for a second. So what would that look like?
It doesn't have to be a demo, because you don't have a product probably at that point.
Okay.
Although if you're, because I deal mostly with software entrepreneurs, and my businesses are software businesses, so I'm coming at it from this angle. But what software entrepreneurs will sometimes do is they'll have a description of what the software will do, but they might also create what are called wireframes that are kind of, here's what this thing might look like and how it might work. It's not functional, but it's just sort of a conceptually, here's what this could be, before they, hire a developer or they write any code. So it depends on, there's the term in the startup world is the minimum viable product, right? And there's kind of a low fidelity version of that, which could be just like, here's a screen of what this could look like and how it could work. And then there's high fidelity, where you actually kind of write code and it's semi-functional. But you want to be able to test things as cost effectively as possible before you keep taking steps to get something out there.
Yeah. So what if it's a physical product? What if it's, a thing? Yeah.
Yeah, much harder. That's where, sketches or 3D mock-ups of what the physical product could be that's a good way to do that. Like at NextCore, we have a prototyping lab for 3D printers and things, so you can kind of create a 3D printout of like what this could look like, and that's one way to test it before you actually go and build, because hardware is, in my opinion, much harder to get to market, right? And you have to get it right the first time. So
yeah. What do you think of what do you think of like a Kickstarter or a GoFundMe or something like that? What do you think of those platforms?
I think they're great. I mean, that's a great, easy way to get commitment, true commitment from people that there's an interest in the product. So 100%. There's kind of a science to it. I think one risk with them is you might have a good idea, but you just didn't talk about it effectively. And so, because there's all sorts of things that can color people's perception of a product and the value that it provides, right? Sometimes people might like the concept of your product, but they hate your branding and they hate your product's name or something, There's all sorts of little subconscious things that might skew it. And so that's the only trick, is like, some people do an incredible job on their Kickstarter campaigns, and it's like vaporware. They never could have built the product. Right. It was never going to come to market. They just did a great job advertising it. And then other people do a terrible job advertising what a great idea is. So it's tricky. It's tough to get that balance.
Interesting. Well, so what would a roadmap look like? So you've got this idea, and at some point you're gonna need to talk probably to a lawyer. At some point you may need to talk to a banker if it's a product thing where you're going to need to get some financing. So what would sort of like and early on you need to do some of that consumer research, like you were saying. So sort of just really, really generally, what would sort of a progression be?
Yeah, I mean, I think some entrepreneurs come to us, and the first thing they're doing is talking about finding a lawyer, an accountant, and setting up their LLC. It's like time out. Yeah. Let's go and talk to the market. Let's validate the demand and the need. Then you can look to formally organize and talk to a lawyer and get an accountant involved. I'm inclined to say, and this is not necessarily professional advice, but what I do is personally is I don't get an accountant involved until the LLC is set up and I'm actually making a little bit of money and, down that path. So, I think that comes later. All the things that we were just talking about in terms of the figuring out the demand and the need, anybody can throw up a landing page on a website and just put the concept out there and just see what people think about it and see if you get engagement. So I would start there and then later on worry about formally organizing and That said, there are certain products where the liability protection and things like that are relevant upfront. So, it's not always 100% that case. Sometimes you do want to, like, especially people creating anything that has some deep IP around it. There's you might not want to be exposing things publicly just yet. So, but in my world that I work in most of the time, it's not about, getting a patent for your software. It's about executing the other person, getting to feed the market.
Just for people who haven't heard it before, what does IP mean?
Intellectual property. Yeah.
Okay.
So
like that's your idea.
Your
okay.
concept. Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just the idea to highlight. Sometimes it's not just the idea at a high level, but like really how you plan to execute on that, like the nuts and bolts of it. So,
okay. So so if let's say that somebody wants to start doing something on their own, what are some of the right kinds of scenarios that would be better as like a side hustle or something part-time? And you said earlier, your first suggestion is don't leave your day job. So
yeah,
what kinds of things would that be? And are there ideas that people should just jump in with both feet?
The ideas, I don't know if it's unique to the concept, whether or not you should start with the side hustle or not. I mean, certain side hustles are tough to do during a day job. Like if you're going to set up a consulting business, that's going to be something where you're going to be having calls with clients during the day.
Sure.
And that your day job is probably going to frown upon that.
Yeah.
So there's certain ideas that don't lend themselves to that as quite as well. But there are ideas, pretty much anything else, if it's some sort of like productized service or it's a software or app idea, that's something you can test that easily without leaving your day job. I'm trying to think of scenarios where leaving your day job is the best path forward. And I honestly, I'm not seeing a scenario, at least with what we've seen come into the incubator.
Yeah.
Can you move faster if you leave your day job? Yes, right? Because by definition, you have more time. Assuming you're good and productive with your time and you know exactly what you want to do. But there's also, I've seen some very, very, very poor decision making when people are draining down their savings. They're watching, their savings go down and they're saying, and all of a sudden they start rushing and they're not making good wise business decisions because they feel rushed and they're panicked and they make poor decisions. And so that's what I see more than anything else. I've seen people, and these are just the saddest stories. I've seen a person blow their inheritance on an app idea that never made it to market. I've seen people drain their 401ks on things that and take out from their 401ks early for things that didn't pan out. So it's just tough. And then they come to us as an incubator and say, hey, can you help me turn it around? And at that point, it's too late. And that's why I like working with the really early stage founders where they're even at the idea stage, because the earlier I can get them that advice, the better. And actually that's a good point too, is just having a group of people that you can trust as a sounding board to kind of give you that sort of advice and brutally honest advice that you need can be good. Like if you don't have a co-founder, and because most of the founders that I work with are solo founders, and it's tough. You need somebody to bounce ideas off of, and so that's another thing that can be a good idea.
Yeah. So I've heard the idea of putting together a board of advisors, who would be other successful business people or that kind of thing. If somebody is a solo entrepreneur and they want to assemble a group of people, what should they look for? What kinds of people should they pull together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mix of people. I think, different skill sets. You could have somebody with a legal or an accounting kind of background as part of that, right? That you just happen to know through your network. But people who have been are one or two steps ahead of you in the journey. And actually, there's a school of thought, and there's benefits and drawbacks to this, of people. You might not want to go and try to get the person that's had 6 exits and is very, very wealthy to be on your personal kind of board of advisors or whatever as you're starting your business. Sometimes you want people that are really just like a year or two ahead of you, because they're still in tactical execution mode and they've seen the challenges you're about to face for the next year. So you want to get a good mix of people. Some people that have been there and done that and been very successful in their careers, but then other folks that are just a couple steps ahead of you in the journey, and get a good mix of backgrounds.
Okay, interesting. And now that I'm thinking about it, how about the value of a naysayer? How about the value of,
Oh, absolutely.
do you want somebody on your team who is, who will describe themselves as a realist, which means they're a pessimist?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you want a diversity of opinions. You want people that are going to call you out when when or question your hypotheses on things. And that's actually another thing too is, you need to treat all of your thoughts, even if you're an expert in your domain, you need to treat everything as a hypothesis that needs to be validated. And so that could be validated by talking to close advisors and people that you trust, but also talking to the market and potential customers. So, but yeah, I think naysayers are good. You want a diversity of opinions, and you don't want just yes people that are just going to kind of parrot back what you want them to hear. So
Yeah. So what we've sort of touched on a lot of this, but what would you say are the elements of a successful startup? What are the things that you see in the people and in how they put things together that seem to come together as a recipe to increase your odds of success?
I talked earlier about the dynamics of the individual, I think. So there's the kind of the grit and the perseverance. The dynamics of the startup. So what would qualify a good startup idea versus a bad one? And again, I'm going to come at this from the angle of software, which is kind of my domain. So I'll speak to that. Not that every business is a software business, but generally speaking, if your idea has a recurring subscription type of revenue component to it, you're going to enjoy running that business a lot better than if you have a spiky up and down, I'll call it kind of project driven revenue, or, more cyclical type of things, or a one-time purchase type of product. That's a harder business to get going. You need to be thinking really early. A startup will have an easy path to distribution and channel to market. So it's not too, it doesn't cost too much to acquire a customer. That's another thing to think about in a good idea. Like, where are you going to find those customers, and how are you at scale, and how much is it going to cost you to get in front of them? A lot of entrepreneurs do not think about that coming out of the gate. Other things are, like, if there's some sort of defensibility to it, like network effects, like the more people that use this product, the more valuable the product or service, the more valuable it becomes, and the more the network grows. That makes it for, a competitive advantage. So there's elements like that to think about in the idea, in addition to the things I talked about earlier in terms of the attributes of the entrepreneur.
Okay. Yeah, I really want to stress that, because I've heard that a lot. I've experienced it in some of the things that I've done, is that recurrent revenue model, the importance of, if you just have a thing and you're going to sell it, and once somebody buys it, they're good, they're all set.
Yeah.
That's the hard business model to succeed at, because every time you want to bring money in, you got to bring a new customer in, right? But anytime you can put together something that involves renewals, replacements, any of those kinds of things,
Yeah.
it makes it so much more viable, so much more quickly.
The pure one-time purchase is probably the worst, but but repeatable, there's repeat purchases, but maybe not predictable. That's
Okay.
kind of in between. And then there's repeating and predictable every month or every year or whatever.
Yeah.
And thinking about products where, especially in the software world, churn and retention of customers is critical, right? Because it might take you 3 to 6 months of revenue to just cover the cost that it took to acquire the customer. But then if the customer leaves at month 6, you've made no money.
Yeah,
So
right.
you have to think
right.
about, like, okay, it takes me this long to recoup the cost of acquiring the customer, but then I need them to stick around for as long as possible. So, that's another thing to think about, is how long would a customer stick around? Or does my product or service solve their problem, and then they no longer need it at some point in the future? And when is the future? So these are things think about from day one.
That's a really important point. It's great to have a recurrent revenue model, but if somebody, subscribes to your service, and then, over the course of 6 months or a year, you solve their problem and they no longer have it,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's you have to count for that in your forecasts, right? As opposed to something that, somebody starts using, and once they start using it, they get so excited that they always want to use it forever and ever,
Yes. Yeah.
or
Like
continue to
one,
replace.
one of my products actually suffers from this. It's a product for running focus groups online, and people don't run focus groups on a monthly basis.
Right.
It's like, they
Yeah.
one month they say, yeah, you know what, we should do some focus group testing and get some feedback, and then 4 months later they do it, and then I don't know, 2 months later, and it's sporadic. And so I give people options. You can buy and pay as you go for a project, or you can get an annual subscription and just use it as much as you want. So, but it was challenging. It has been challenging business to run because of that. And there's ways to mix and match, like I just said, like that I did for mine, where it's not all subscription. You give people the option, but if I could just get everybody on a subscription, that would make for fewer sleepless nights. Put it that way.
What about something where somebody buys the service or the product, but then there's some other kind of revenue, so they're not continuously buying the same thing, but they might buy support for the product, or they might buy, you buy this thing, but then you get a level, a service contract for so how
absolutely.
where could that fit in?
So especially in the software world, with a lot of software, there's an ability to add a services component on top of it. And I do this on all of my products. So you can use the software if you want on a DIY, log in, enter your credit card, you're good to go. Or if you want to pay us as an expert to do it for you, we offer that on top of it. So that's one way to monetize. Another way is to, and a lot of entrepreneurs, especially in the software world, don't think about that. Because services are like a 4-letter word in the software world. Like, you want to have it pure play. You just enter your credit card and you never have to talk to the customer again. But it doesn't work that way. That's
right. Yeah.
People want it to work, but that is not the way life as a software entrepreneur works. But so there's that, and then there's also the idea of try to get people to just become a customer on a low dollar product. It could be, and that doesn't have to be that could be a one-time purchase, like a information product. Like, I put together this online course for how to do X, Y, and Z. And then, as part of the online course, we also offer this software that, that helps you fulfill what you're trying to do in that online course. And so you can get them in on the course and then upsell them to something bigger down the road. So that's another strategy as well.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, and one thing that just occurred to me that we probably should have brought up earlier, but one of the things that I hear a lot about, and I'm interested in your perspective on it, is one of the best things you can bring to market, one of the best things you can do as a business is something that scratched your own itch, something that really bothered you and you couldn't find a good solution, so you had to build it yourself.
Yeah.
I'm thinking specifically about Sarah Blakely, who was, and I think I have the name right, who was in the news this week because she's the founder of Spanx, and that just got bought out by an outside investor for $1 billion or so. And that was one of the things where she was just really bothered by panty lines in her skirt, and so she constructed the first couple of prototypes herself, sewing stuff up herself, and then she shared some with friends, and then eventually enough people wanted it that that she got a contract to manufacture them, and here we are. She's $1 billion company.
Yeah. There was a survey that was done a couple of years ago that was where entrepreneurs got the source of their idea, and it was with a few thousand entrepreneurs, and it was almost exactly half. It was 48% of entrepreneurs, their idea came from just scratching their own itch. And it's the great place to start. And I think what I've noticed too is the entrepreneurs that are scratching their own itch and they are the users and customers of their product, they tend to stick with the product longer. They're more motivated to work on it, right? They don't lose steam and just say, I'm kind of tired of this, I'm going to move to another idea, because it solves a problem for them. The only risk is you have to make sure that you're not a sample size of 1 or 2.
Right.
You have to, your needs might be extremely unique and totally niche to the market, and that's why you still need to validate it, even if it's scratching your own itch. So
that's a good point.
A little careful.
Yeah.
But.
So we'll get to next core in just a minute, but generally, where can people go to find resources, information, support if they want to start developing an idea?
If they want to start developing an idea, I would check out, so Steve Blank is kind of a prominent person in the startup community, or Eric Ries. There's the kind of lean startup movement. I would go searching for that on Google, or look up Steve Blank stuff on customer development and customer discovery. And those would be good places to start. Inspiration for ideas. I use and like checking out producthunt.com. You'll see all sorts of different tech related products, mostly software, but it's some hardware and things like that too, that launch on Product Hunt. Kickstarter too, like you can get ideas for, things to types of businesses to start there. Another thing that I would recommend doing a Google search on is the concept of productized services, because that can be a nice stepping stone into an eventual, you take a service. The concept is basically you take a service that you would do kind of on a one-off custom basis, but you make it into more of a product. You put a fixed scope on it and you attach a price to it, but it's a service. It looks like you're buying a product, but it's underneath the hood, it's a service. And so that's a good place for people to start. If you look up productized services, you'll find a lot of good information on that. So it depends on what you're trying what kind of startup you're trying to start. Like there's a lot of, it depends to it, but those are some resources that I've used and recommend in the past.
Okay. And as we said at the beginning, you run a startup incubator with NextCore here in Rochester. Tell us what's NextCore and what can it do for people?
Yeah, so we are a startup incubator that we serve startups in and around our region here in Rochester. We have a number of different programs. We have one for like photonics and optics companies. We have one for clean technology companies. I run the incubation program, which is mostly software companies in that program. It's not all software companies. We do have some hardware companies. And we have we have 70 startups, but over 100 founders that I'm serving in some capacity. Yeah, we help startups all the way from, helping them to select their idea, to giving them coaching and mentorship all throughout. We have access to kind of grants that can help people get things started. We have office hours with VCs and accountants. We have a beautiful 40,000 square foot facility in downtown. So if people need space, we have that. So, we basically serve entrepreneurs at all stages. Our model, though, is that we are serving entrepreneurs that are trying to build something scalable and that serves a customer base outside of the region. So, people working on launching a restaurant or something like that, there's better resources in town for that, but we're for more, scalable types of startup concepts. So.
Okay, cool. So we here at 30-Minute Money, we're really into 30-minute action lists. So if somebody is thinking that they've wanted to be in business for themselves, or they have an idea, what would you put on that list that somebody could accomplish in 30 minutes?
In 30 minutes, wow.
Yeah, what would be a first step?
A first step. Wow, that's a tough one. I think I mentioned the landing page thing, just creating a page that describes it. That's a 30-minute step, like maybe more than 30 minutes. That's a tricky one.
Well, let's say that they could outline in 30 minutes.
They could outline it in 30. Actually, you could Google this. What Amazon does for their product development is they write the press release for the release of the product before they create the product. And
interesting.
It's kind of a cool exercise. If you Google that, that can be done in 30 minutes, writing what the press release looks like. And sometimes it can help you think through the product in a way that, puts you outside of the realm of I'm the entrepreneur, but I'm writing the press release about this thing and who is it for and what does this press release look like? That's a 30-minute exercise that can help you articulate your idea. And if you search about, there's lots of stuff online about how Amazon does that process. So interesting. A 30-minute step.
That is interesting. Maybe even better, hire somebody to write the press release for you so that you're forced to explain it to somebody else.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Because I mentioned, your ability to communicate, you might have a great idea, but if you don't communicate it well, it's dead on the vine, you know, so you gotta, that's a great idea. Yeah. Hire somebody else to write that press release and see if you got it out of your head correctly.
Yeah,
So
interesting. Well, Matt, this has been great. I really appreciate all this. So if people want to find out more about NextScore, or they want to find more about you individually, where can they go?
yeah, if you go for NextScore, and I should say for NextScore, if you're listening and you happen to be living in Western New York, I would go to nextcore.org, nextcorps.org. We're a nonprofit, that's hence the .org. And we also don't, I should mention, we don't take any equity or anything like that. Sometimes startup accelerators and incubators will take equity. We don't take a piece of any of the companies. So if you're in Western New York, definitely check out NextScore and our programs and services. If you want to connect with me, you can just find me online. I just have go to Matt, MattFoley.me. And, you know, my bio's there, and you can check out my LinkedIn and connect with me there. So
awesome. Great. Thanks Matt. Thanks very much for joining us here on 30 Minute Money.
Thank you. It's been great.